Every network in America is telling you this is Iraq all over again. They are wrong. And the fact that they are wrong matters more than you think, because the real story of what happened in Iran this morning is not about one strike, one president, or one nuclear program. It is about a 118-year financial operation that has controlled every government Iran has ever had, the Shah, the Ayatollahs, all of them, and the moment that operation started to collapse. The New York Times editorial board published a piece today that accidentally proved it does not understand the war it is denouncing. I'm going to show you exactly where they contradicted themselves, why the vice president made a specific public promise 2 days before the bombs fell, and what the phrase, "take over your government," spoken directly to the Iranian people in a wartime address, actually signals to anyone who knows the history. Stay with me, because if you walk away after the next cable news hit, you will spend the next 6 months being systematically misled about one of the most significant geopolitical shifts in a generation. Before we get into what this means, let us establish the confirmed facts, because in the first hours of any military operation, the noise-to-signal ratio is catastrophic. According to official Pentagon statements and a direct televised address from the president early Saturday morning, U.S. forces operating in coordination with Israeli Defense Forces commenced Operation Epic Fury, a series of targeted strikes on Iranian nuclear infrastructure, ballistic missile production facilities, and Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps command notes. The president listed a documented record of Iranian-linked attacks spanning 47 years, the 1979 hostage crisis, the 1983 Marine barracks bombing in Beirut that killed 241 Americans, assassination attempts against American officials on U.S. soil attributed by the FBI to Iranian intelligence, and the October 7th attack on Israel. He also stated that his administration had sought diplomatic resolution repeatedly, that Iran accepted terms, reversed, then ultimately refused to renounce its nuclear ambitions. That claim is consistent with the collapsed 2022 JCPOA renegotiation talks in Vienna and back-channel contacts reported by Reuters in late 2024. What is not yet confirmed includes the precise damage assessment at targeted sites, the full scope of Israeli participation, and the classification level of the intelligence justifying the timing. Iran has already launched retaliatory drone and missile strikes targeting U.S. military assets in Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, and the UAE. Casualties have been reported but not independently verified. The certainty cable news is projecting right now is not warranted by facts on the ground. To understand why this moment arrived, you need to go back to 1908, the year British speculator William Knox Darcy struck oil in southwest Persia under a concession purchase from the Persian Shah for a fraction of its value. From that concession, the Anglo-Persian Oil Company was born, later renamed Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, today known as British Petroleum BP. The British government purchased a 51% controlling stake in 1914. Winston Churchill, then First Lord of the Admiralty, described Iranian oil as, in his own documented words, a prize from fairyland beyond our wildest dreams. The Royal Navy ran on that oil. Britain's industrial economy in the first half of the 20th century was subsidized by wealth extracted from Iranian territory, while Iranian workers at the Abadan refinery, by 1950 the largest oil refinery in the world, lived in segregated settlements without running water. When Mohammad Mossadegh was elected prime minister in 1951 and nationalized the oil industry, the British government and the CIA responded in 1953 with Operation Ajax, a covert coup that removed him and reinstalled the Shah as a client ruler. That intervention is now fully declassified and acknowledged by the CIA. When the Shah outlived his usefulness in 1979, Western intelligence maintained channels to clerical factions during the transition, documented in British National Archives records analyzed by investigative journalist Mark Curtis. One client replaced another. This is not ancient history. This is the operating system every Iranian government has run on for over a century, including the one being struck right now. Now let us examine what this strike means across 5 dimensions, because anyone offering you a single-sentence verdict on this operation is not being straight with you. On the legal dimension, the administration has not sought a formal declaration of war from Congress, relying instead on the 2001 and 2002 AUMF's and Article 2 Commander-in-Chief authority under the Imminent Threat Doctrine. Harvard Law professor Jack Goldsmith, who has written extensively on executive war powers, has noted publicly that the legal architecture for unilateral military action against state actors is substantially weaker than for non-state terrorist organizations. Congress, including members of the president's own party, is expected to demand classified briefings within 48 hours under the War Powers Act. Congress is not a passive audience here. It is a structural constraint, and its posture in the next 2 weeks will be one of the clearest indicators of whether this operation has the institutional durability to achieve its stated objectives. But the legal questions are almost secondary to what is happening inside both political parties right now, because this strike has created a fracture neither side has a clean answer to. On the political dimension, Vice President J.D. Vance, speaking to the Washington Post on Friday, 2 days before the strikes, stated with unusual directness that, and this is a direct quotation, there is no chance this becomes a multi-year Middle East engagement. Vance is a Marine veteran who served in Iraq and built his political identity on opposition to the forever war model. His public pre-commitment to a limited operation is a political act designed to bind the administration, rhetorically, to an exit framework before the first bomb fell. On the Democratic side, senators who oppose Trump nominees on foreign policy grounds now face a dilemma. Oppose a strike against a regime that attempted to assassinate American officials on U.S. soil, or support a president they have spent years calling reckless. The political calculations in both caucuses over the next 72 hours will shape the institutional response more than any military variable currently visible. Strip away the political theater and look at the money, because the financial dimensions are where the long-term story lives. On the economic dimension, oil futures spiked approximately 8% at the Sunday open, consistent with Strait of Hormuz risk pricing, but have not reached levels indicating traders expect prolonged regional war. Gulf sovereign wealth funds, which have over the past 14 months committed more than $2 trillion to American manufacturing, energy, and technology infrastructure through bilateral agreements publicly referenced in U.S. Treasury statements, have not signaled withdrawal. The Gulf states have a direct financial stake in Trump's regional architecture succeeding. An Iranian missile strike on U.S. assets in their territory does not push them toward Tehran. It pushes them further into the American security umbrella. Whether this operation accelerates or disrupts the redirection of Gulf capital is the economic question that will take months to fully answer. On the public opinion dimension, a Pew Research Center survey from October 2024 found that 61% of Americans supported military action to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons, while only 34% supported a ground invasion. The distinction the administration draws between targeted strikes and occupation is politically coherent with existing public preferences, if it holds. The New York Times editorial board today simultaneously condemned the strike as the act of a madman while acknowledging in its own language that Iran presents distinct threat combining murderous ideology with nuclear ambitions, and that presidents of both parties have rightly committed to preventing Iranian nuclear acquisition. They called it madness and then described the logic behind it as bipartisan consensus. That contradiction is not accidental. It is the clearest sign the standard anti-war narrative is not going to survive contact with Iran's actual documented record. On the international dimension, Gulf Cooperation Council states have issued statements expressing concern about escalation without condemning the strikes, which in diplomatic terms is as close to tacit approval as you get from states hosting both American bases and Iranian-linked populations. The most instructive historical comparison is not Iraq 2003, but the 1986 U.S. strikes on Libya, a limited, targeted operation against a state sponsor of terrorism that produced no occupation and a measurable reduction in Libyan-sponsored terrorism for nearly a decade. Iran is a far more sophisticated state actor than Gaddafi's Libya, but the structural logic being invoked is far closer to the Libya model than anything that happened in Iraq. Now let us look at who is actually on the board. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps controls an estimated 40% of the Iranian economy through front companies and import monopolies. Its senior commanders have no institutional incentive to negotiate their own irrelevance. They are structurally committed to escalation in a way the Iranian population simply is not. Iran has a young, educated, urban population that staged major protest movements as recently as 2022 following the death of Mahsa Amini. The president's direct address to those citizens was a calculated appeal to a population that polling by IranWire consistently shows is deeply hostile to the current regime. The Gulf states will be more supportive behind the scenes than their public statements suggest. And Israel under Netanyahu presents complicated alignment. His long-term interest is Iranian nuclear containment, but his short-term interest is being seen as the central actor in that containment. Trump's regional vision, which includes Turkey, Qatar, and Egypt as central partners, is not Netanyahu's preferred architecture, and that tension will surface in ways current coverage is almost entirely missing. Put these actors together, and a pattern emerges. The IRGC needs escalation to survive institutionally. The Iranian population needs de-escalation to take the opening the president offered. The Gulf states need quick resolution to protect their investment commitments. Netanyahu needs the outcome to be Israeli legible, without being Israeli controlled. These interests are not compatible, and the pressure they create on each other will determine whether this ends in 2 weeks or 2 years. Based on everything we have walked through, here is the most honest, forward-looking analysis available, with explicit acknowledgement that predictions made in the first 24 hours of a military operation carry unusually high uncertainty. The most likely scenario, roughly 50 to 55% probability, is a short, intense exchange lasting 2 to 4 weeks, after which both sides find a diplomatic off-ramp. Iran halts nuclear enrichment under international monitoring, and the administration declares success without a ground component. The conditions making this likely are Vance's public pre-commitment, the Gulf states' interest in rapid stabilization, and Iran's awareness that its conventional military cannot sustain a prolonged exchange against American and Israeli air power. A second scenario, roughly 25 to 30% probability, involves IRGC hardliners escalating beyond the administration's tolerance threshold through a strike producing significant American military casualties, or through Hezbollah activation in Lebanon drawing Israel into a broader ground campaign. That is the scenario that structurally resembles Iraq, not because of intent but because of cascading retaliation logic that no party fully controls once it begins. A third scenario, roughly 10 to 15% probability, is the one almost no analyst is discussing: internal fracture within the IRGC itself. The Guard contains factions and a younger generation of commanders who did not live through the revolution. Under sufficient military pressure, a negotiated internal transition becomes conceivable. The historical analog is Romania in 1989, where the security apparatus turned on the regime it was built to protect. Low probability, but the consequences would constitute the most significant geopolitical event of the 21st century. Watch the casualty count on both sides, Hezbollah's behavior, Russian air defense posture in the region, and whether Congress moves assertively under the War Powers Act. Those 4 variables will tell you more than anything else about which scenario is materializing. Here is the only sentence that actually matters right now. If the administration's limited strike framework holds, what happens next in Iran could be the most consequential geopolitical realignment since the end of the Cold War. If it does not hold, we will spend the next decade paying for it in ways that make Iraq look manageable. Either way, the 118 years of financial architecture we walk through today is not going to dissolve quietly. The people who built it still control institutions, editorial boards, and the narrative infrastructure most Americans consume every day. The most important thing you can do right now is keep asking why the story you are being told in the mainstream press is so consistently missing the structural layer that makes this moment legible. We will be covering every significant development as this evolves. If you want analysis that includes the parts the networks leave out, subscribe and hit the notification bell. And drop one word in the comments right now: escalate if you think this gets significantly larger, or contain if you think the administration's framework holds. Let us see where this community stands.